Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media production, and our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about SuperSources. Not so much, we're not going to look at everybody's SuperSources. We're going to really analyze and talk about how we build them and why we build them. It's not going to be specific. I know we're calling it SuperSources, and that's a BlackMagic term, but we'll be just talking about SuperSources as a design element. So we'll talk about why we put things where and how we put them there, and little pieces of that puzzle. So stay tuned for that in the second hour. And if you've got questions about SuperSources, go ahead and throw them in right now. If you have questions of your own, you can use this little guy right here. See this little QR code there, askofficehours.com. So you can go ahead and ask the questions there if you're not already in Mokana, and you don't have to sign in or anything else. You can just kind of throw your question in. So go ahead and throw that question in there, and we'll look through the questions and bring some of them into the main show. So stay tuned for that, and go ahead and throw your questions in throughout the hour, and make sure to, if you're in Mokana, to vote on those questions so we know which ones are the most important to you. Let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Mitch, what do we got?
Thank you, Alex. First in is Sean Johnson from New York, New York. Now that the Sony FR7 has been out for a while, what are the panelists and users' thoughts and experiences? Match well with an FX6? Can you program moves with the in-out keyframes and speed control? Use it behind a prompter? Thanks.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'll answer the part about cutting it against a FX6 should be no problem. Exact same sensor and maybe even the same camera innards in there. So, yes, a FX6 and a FR7 would be a good match.
Yeah, we use it regularly with the FX6, and it cuts perfectly. So we use here's how we oftentimes set up. We do a lot of things where we have Q&A. So you have a bunch of people that are going to come and sit down, and the FR7s have been kind of a godsend to us, because it's what we have is you have your let's say we have the folks that we're having sit down. We'll have them sit like this. We'll have a moderator over here typically, and then they're going to be walking on this way. So what we do is we put the FX6 on this far end so that we can catch them. That's the one you want to have an operator on, because they just don't know what they're going to do. And so then we put the FR7s. We usually have one here in the center, and then we put another one over here. That's kind of, well, it's actually not quite that far over here, one over here, and one down here. And the reason we put these two middle ones in is so that we really like this strong rake that goes across here. But if this person leans forward, they get in front of the moderator, and the moderator moves forward. So there's a bunch of, we like the rake, but we don't like people to get in front of it. So these are kind of safeties. And you don't do this if you have it operated, because that would be too expensive. so we put more cameras in. But this one's operated with an operator here. But these, and I made these people, but they're cameras here. And we cut them. So this is an FX6, and then these are all FR7s going all the way around. It's worked. It just works really well. It looks really good. And we've been really happy with the output of it. We haven't really tried. We can definitely pre-program settings. We haven't tried to program complicated moves to it, or specifically shooting, cutting to it, panning, and so on and so forth. And it probably can do it. I think one of the issues is that I have a tendency not to operate that way with PTZs. So my own limitations of how I approach PTZs is that I generally just want to cut between them. I don't use PTZs for movement, and so we have done it, but it's pretty rare for us to do that. So anyway, I think that I probably can do that. It's just not something. It's not a use case that I use. As far as teleprompters go, you need to get a specific kind of teleprompter hood for it. Prompter People makes one, and it's it's octagonal. It gives it some space. You can't do everything you can do with a PTZ because the whole hood is not moving with it, but you do get a little bit of motion, and where that's useful. And we've built studios with PTZs that are inside of these larger teleprompters backings. And the advantage of those is not that you can turn 90 degrees, but 10, 20 degrees around. So someone's sitting, you got it all kind of lined up where you want it, and someone moves a little bit, you can kind of coax back and forth with them and make those fine adjustments. And so it's not, you can't go very far, but it really makes a difference. It's like, it's a game changer when you're using it the way it was designed. Go ahead and Courtney.
Yeah, you said I was going to comment on the teleprompting stuff. We've been using that type of configuration for years. We call it roll-up configuration like this. You've seen there's some really old Betacam shown, but the teleprompter sits on its own stand, and you roll it up in front of the lens. Of course, since it's not attached to the lens, you can't do things like follow somebody in, as they enter the room or something. You can't pan them in. Do things like that. But for a static frame where you're just readjusting for zooming in, reframing from a one shot to a two shot, you can do that much movement without it attached to the lens, especially with a PTZ that has a smaller diameter lens, because then you get a lot more freedom inside that hood to pan and tilt within the hood. And it helps to have at least a 15 or 17-inch teleprompter glass hood, and you can't use the teleprompters. We have cloth backs on them, so you can't use the ones that have a rigid back on them, because you usually, it limits the lens movement within the rigid back. If you have a vacuum formed plastic shield shroud on the back of the glass, that makes it tough. Use a cloth shroud, and then you won't have any problem. You can actually put the PTZ underneath the shroud.
Yeah, and the one that we've used in the past has been this one, which is a hard one, but it goes all the way around the camera, and it's designed to go around the PTZs themselves. And so that huge box sits behind the PTZ, and we've put BRC 900s is the last time I really used these heavily. So they fit in, and the BRC 900 and the FR7 are about the same size. So I think that would probably work. Next question.
Eric Hers from Hartford, Connecticut, asking, how do you like the use of a Sonic box with a capture card to deliver video to either vMix on a Windows B-Link PC or Mimo Live on a Mac Mini? How would this quality compare to using the USB output from an Atem Mini instead?
Yeah, we have found that there is in many cases the USB out is crushing the blacks a little bit, and we think that BlackMagic is working on this, but I think that there's a little bit of a crush going on, and so you may see more detail in the blacks if you're using a video output. Now, you may also see that if you're taking it from the Mac, if you're delivering these things from the Sonnet box, the other thing for you to consider is if you're doing a capture card, you could definitely do that from the Mini, but you could also, if you're delivering from I know that previous conversations were talking about using Zoom ISO. Of course, Zoom ISO does NDI to Mimo and to vMix, so those are other things to kind of consider. So I think that those are things, but I think that as comparing the video output of the Extreme to the USB, I think you're going to get a higher quality video from the HDMI output. Next question.
From Sean Johnson in New York. Anyone have any experience with NewTek ProTech plans? I know this might be an it depends question, but curious if it's worth it. Anyone have experiences, good or bad, to share? Thank you.
Go, John.
Too many of us started with the TriCaster and got burned in the middle of the shows with TriCaster crashing. We were all supported by our local dealers that we bought the equipment from, but NewTek's no longer. It's VizRT now, and so we all moved on from the TriCaster platform.
Next question.
David Brady in New York, New York. Is there a method outside of Photoshop, I use Pixelmator Pro, to create pre-multiplied graphics? I was never that good at math.
Mitchell?
I think that was a joke there about the math comment, because there's no math, that we have to deal with. Generally, I would use Photoshop, but if I'm not, I can do it in After Effects. I know it's way overkill, but you have a super amount of control over alpha channels and what type it is, whether it's pre-multiplied or not.
Jesse?
Sorry. The question's a little unclear, so this is a bit of a Hail Mary, but I think what you might want to be doing, we've got a picture of Frankenstein addressing Congress, and we've got the black and white matte channel down there, and we've also got a checkerboard just to show you what's going to happen in a second. So what you do, I'm not sure if this is what you want to do, but you go over to your effects, add effect, mask to alpha, and then it will pull the alpha channel from the layer below it. So now we've got Frankenstein extracted.
Yeah, I think that it's not exactly what he's looking for there, and that is to pre-multiply the black over top. So typically what happens is that you have, there's a couple different ways for these images to be composited. And so one requires a straight alpha, and the other one requires a straight RGB, and then there's pre-multiplied. And so, how the compositor expects to have that is important. So what happens generally when you have an alpha channel, so I've got my plate and I've got my alpha channel, is that you take the alpha channel and you punch out a hole for something to go into it. So you punch out a hole in the background, and the way you do that is to multiply. So this is why the pre-multiplication comes in. You literally use the term. It'll say if you go to your blend settings, you're going to see multiply. It is multiply, and what that means is take the value of the pixel on the top and you multiply it to the pixel below it. So here's our pixel below. So this has got and it's 0 through 1. So if I have a number here that is, let's say, 0.5, and this bottom one is 1, and I multiply them, I get 0.5. See, I feel like I'm in math class again. So, but it's not hard math. This is all math that you hopefully learned by the time you're in 3rd or 4th grade. And so anyway, so that's what that multiply. These two multiplied together equals this. Now, why that's important is because this will be the edges that you have there. But more importantly, you'll have I'm going to use a darker color here. Let's say you have the top one, your alpha channel. It's brown because I can't draw black the way I set this up. And then I have, let's just say this is 0.0. This is 0. This is 0. This is black, right? Black is 0. And I have, underneath it, I have white. And this is 1. When I multiply 0 to it, I get, anyone? I just had to say that. 0. So what happens is that the black has, what happens is that the black in your alpha channel pushes everything in the background to black, and the areas along those edges slowly fade back out again to where it needs to be. Now, what you do then is you invert that alpha channel and you multiply that to the foreground, and that knocks out everything around the foreground except for what your subject, and that should, because they're using the same alpha channel, that should match perfectly when it's set over top of the background. Now, the challenge here is that sometimes people don't do the second knockout. So when you're assuming that the RGB has been pre-multiplied, you're doing the knockout to the background, and then you're just adding the top. You're adding, again, it's just add. When I say add, it's adding that pixel value of the foreground to the background. So it's not doing that extra knockout, and it saves a little bit of processing time. It's a little bit simpler. And so that's what that when you're looking at pre-multiply. So when you understand how it works, you can do it in anything. So basically, if you are in Pixelmator, you need to take your alpha channel and you select a layer, and you just say fill. You basically invert the alpha channel and fill it, and that's going to be all fill with black, and it'll be all black. And then you just set that layer to multiply on top of the piece, and that's going to pre-multiply. That's what it's doing. It's pre-multiplying the RGB. It's applying the alpha channel. It's multiplying that alpha channel to the RGB, and everything will turn black. And you need to do that, for instance, with BlackMagic, because when BlackMagic does the composite, it assumes that you're giving it a pre-multiplied alpha channel. So if you ever see things like showing up around in your composite in an Atem, that's what's happening. Anyway, so that's you can absolutely do it in anything. You can actually do it in with a little bit of work, you can do it. I don't know if you can do it in Keynote or not, but you can definitely do it in anything that has a multiply layer. You can fill it with that alpha channel and then multiply it to the RGB channel. Next question.
Eric Hers from Hartford, Connecticut. When will vMix and Mimo Live support AV1?
Bill?
You have to ask the developers about the when stuff. I think there's a reasonably good bet now on AV1. It comes out of the Alliance for Open Media, so it is a less protected, I guess, the Alliance says it's open source, and so everybody should be able to get access to writing in this. It's been very popular up to this point. It's supposed to be actually better, particularly for web distribution, than the prior, from VP9 all the way through the rest of those things, and now we've got other encoders that are a little more restricted. So I think there's a good chance, but also often I've bet on things like VP9 that I thought would take over because they were open source, and they didn't. So I'm cautious, but this looks pretty good from what I read about it.
Yeah, everyone's going to support AV1. I think it's just a matter of when. And most likely it's still going to take, I would say, another year or two before you see it roll out. These things take a lot longer than you think. I mean, H.264 we heard about for years. It was out there, and H.265 is just barely coming out, even though we've been talking about it for 10 years. So these are now AV1 will probably go faster because it's not being encumbered by the licensing mess that H.264 and H.265 were because of the MPEG consortium. But it still is going to take some time to come out. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, maybe it could be a problem in the vMix and Mimo Live area because of its real-time nature. And a really good compression may take 2 passes, to achieve, the cleanest type of compression or the highest amount of compression with the least amount of degradation. So maybe that's why you're not seeing it in the live video types, because you'd have to have a hardware encoder of some sort to do it fast enough. Encoder and decoder, especially encoder. Encoding takes a lot longer, but if you're going to try and do it live, encode it live before it goes out, it takes some time, so it may cause a little too much delay for the live switchers.
Yeah, again, for the live switching, most likely, yeah, you're right, that I think Mimo and vMix will probably be the last places that it goes. And really, AV1 is really more of a delivery method. So it's not really a mezzanine format to use in production, or it won't be immediately. I think that Mimo may benefit from this faster than vMix. And the reason is that we saw with the iPhone 15 that there is a AV1 decoder that's in the hardware. So they actually built a chip for it. I think many of us think that's a sign that the next generation of Macs will have an AV1 decoder and possibly an encoder built into them. So so you'll have a Mac Mini or a Studio, or it'd probably be the Studio, but the Mac Mini Pro that has encoder and decoder chips in it for AV1. At that point, it's kind of a game changer, and it'll push AV1 most likely forward much faster. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, there's an inline note here that vMix 27 has announced they're going to support AV1. So the more people who adopt it and more systems, the faster this should happen. Nobody knows for sure when that comes out or anything else, but it's coming.
It does look like vMix 27 was a big update. they spent, it was kind of like, let's do all the things that everybody asked for. So it looks like a big update. We really should do probably a whole second hour on that update, but we'll talk about it soon. Next question.
John Fisher from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma has a question. Are the Windows 11 licenses on the inexpensive mini PCs legitimate? Is it better to stick with known manufacturers like Melee and B-Link to avoid getting burned from a pirated OS?
Courtney?
I have not yet been burned by a pirated OS. Usually the ones, sometimes they'll tell you that, a version of Windows 11 is included or that is just, it's installed but not activated. And you would have to pay for activation on it. But all the ones that I've gotten, all the Melees come with Windows 11 Pro, because Microsoft has a licensing deal for certain manufacturers that are mass producing these small form factor PCs. And I think in that classification, the licensing is almost free. And they because they encode the certificate of authenticity, or basically the key, into the firmware on the PC before they ship it. It's in the ROMs in the firmware. So that's where the license sits on these small form factor PCs. So they are authorized and activated. All the ones that I've gotten have been Windows 11, 10, either Windows 8 through Windows 11. They've all been activated, and I've never had Windows complain or suddenly go or pop up a message saying you're not running an authorized version of the software. And that's why there's such a really good deal if you need to run something on Windows and you're a Mac person, because you can get a small PC like this for under $150 sometimes. And that includes a Windows 11 Pro license, which if you bought by itself to run under a virtual machine on a Mac would cost you more than $225 or $299. So it's quite a deal.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Wasn't there a time that Windows would be distributed as an OEM version and it would be missing some features? I think they also called it Home versus Pro. That might be something to look out for. It's not pirated. It's just a different featured version of Windows.
Yeah, I got two different melees. They're exactly the same melees, and I got two different OSs with them. So I was like, one was easy to install and one was not.
Well, one you can always update, install a new version, and it will automatically check, and it'll find the license key in the firmware and automatically authenticate itself. But there are different versions. Windows Home, Windows Pro are two different versions. The difference is the Windows Pro lets you remote into it. Remote desktop is enabled on the Pro version. It's not enabled on the Home version, so watch out for that.
Next question.
From Kyle Hammond from Chicago, Illinois. The question is, does Mimo Live accept OSC? Looking to cut a show via QLab.
I don't know. I believe that it does. I believe it accepts OSC commands, but I'm not 100% sure. So stay tuned for that. And the one thing is Oliver is in our Discord as well. So I'm sorry we don't have that answer for you, but I think that it does. I'm pretty sure that it does handle REST commands, and I do believe that it does OSC support, but we haven't tried to use it that way. Next question.
From Daniel Patridge from Rochester, Minnesota. Anyone else become a convert to Roland switchers from an Atem Extreme HDMI unit? I don't think we've ever had to go back. Now, after using the Roland V8 HD, they seem so much better for most users.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Observation, Roland's been doing a lot longer than BlackMagic, but the problem is that BlackMagic has a much broader ecosystem that you can buy into. So the Rolands are nice and maybe a little nicer, but they don't do all the things that the Atems do.
Yeah, it's I think that if you're not in the overall BlackMagic ecosystem, I think that it's easier to pick the Rolands. The Rolands definitely have some better audio pipelines. I have to look at this one specifically. Better audio pipelines and some other creature comforts, and they're simpler to use by themselves. And so I do think that they're a pretty solid unit if you're not in the rest of the ecosystem. Being able to shade your cameras when we're doing live stuff, being able to shade our cameras from the switcher, and also just all the subsystems of being able to have people writing other pieces of software like Mix Effect and other things like that are really, really important to us. And so I think that that's the real challenge, for a lot of us is that we really it's part of this larger ecosystem is what keeps us hung, and that's what BlackMagic has gotten exceptionally good at, is supporting the ecosystem so that you're really part of a big network. So the Roland kind of stands on its own. I think that if it's working for you, that sounds great. But I don't know of a lot of Atem users that are doing that. Quick reminder, of course, that you can ask questions throughout the hour. Either you can ask them inside of Makana, or you can use this little ask officehours.com. You can use the QR code there. So go ahead and ask those questions for the first hour or the second hour. We're going to talk about SuperSources. If you're asking about SuperSources with this code, you just got to put in the question that you're interested in SuperSources so that we understand that it's for the second hour. So make sure to kind of annotate that when you put it in there. But I ask those questions there. Courtney, do you have another answer for?
Yeah, I was just going to say the Roland is quite a bit more expensive. That's about $600, and I think the standard Atem Mini is $300 or $400 on $299 or $399, I think. So it is almost twice as much to buy the Roland. And I'm not sure whether the nice thing about the Atems is the fact that their software, you can have multiple instances of the software running on different computers and all controlling the same switcher, which is handy. And I just wish mine wouldn't glitch like that. Sorry.
Wasn't that a 60 frame thing? It's not a 60 frame thing?
I thought it was, and it worked for about a day and a half, and then now it started doing it again. Windows, of course, there was a 0-day exploit that they pushed out an update for, and maybe it brought it back. Who knows?
Windows. Next question.
Funsak Dorji from Dharamshala, India, asking, greetings. Here's a link to a live stream. If you look at it, what does the panel think is the cause of the disturbances?
Good, Bill.
Well, it was a little hard to figure out exactly what you were looking at for the disturbances. I was able to watch a couple of minutes of it a little while ago here at the beginning of the show. And the main things I heard were audio anomalies, and most of them were just either people on, it's kind of like a parliamentary procedure. So there's a lot of people involved, a lot of microphones, a lot of speakers. But I heard people moving desk-mounted mics overtly and causing all sorts of audio glitches from that. That's one of those things where if you can get an auto mix in there to do the basic function of muting everything without the active speaker. Now, if it's the active speaker who's reaching out and moving the mic, that's not going to deal with it. So it's really hard to get away from needing to have a human being on a mute button for those kind of circumstances where somebody does something weird. But other than that, I mean, I think you're doing the job of letting the constituency in this parliamentary kind of procedure get the content they're looking for. So good job overall, but that's what I heard. I heard more audio disturbances than video glitches. I did see some switching errors and some, a PInP would come up, a little picture-in-picture thing, and then go out without any real purpose in having it there. But I'm assuming you're working with a mostly volunteer crew. If you're not, maybe it's just the number of flying hours they need to get up to speed with to get used to all their equipment.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe they have an automated system that does video follows audio. So whenever an auto mix switches into a certain microphone, it'll switch to that video. And if somebody just is adjusting their mic but not saying anything, that can trigger a false switch to that person's microphone or something, which would cause a temporary video interruption for no reason, and as well as an audio glitch as well. So what Bill was saying about somebody adjusting their microphone may have to do with the automation and switching.
Next question.
Joaquin Matus from Imperial Valley, California. I'm looking for a device, preferably rack-mountable, with a headphone output that can monitor program audio from an embedded SDI signal. The BlackMagic Audio Monitor 12G seems like it fits this need, but what other options are there?
Mitchell?
In the broadcast industry, a lot of people use a device called a Wholer, WHOLER. It's a one-rack unit device that comes in different flavors. It's pretty good sounding for a one-rack unit device, and it's a good alternative, but I kind of like the BlackMagic one.
Yeah, it depends on what you're using it for. So one of the things that's really important for us for a monitor is we always make sure that on site or in our control room, there is a very tightly wound version of it that has the fewest amount of electronics so that we can look for audio sync. So are people's lips in sync? And the one problem with the 12G is that it's a little small. There is some Sony production monitors that are 17-inch or 19-inch. It's a little easier to look at people's lips and make sure that they're in sync. So that's the only thing I would say. Otherwise, I think the 12G works great. We often use the 17-inch BlackMagic monitor, and then we combine that with a BlackMagic SDI audio monitor, and we loop those, and it's close enough. Like we definitely don't have a variance there between the two if they're looped right to each other. And so that has been what we use. We have headphones and speakers and so on and so forth. But if you're in the field, I think that the 12G is going to work great. But, Atomos has some of these as well that are larger. Again, just think about what you're using them for. If it's just, I just want to see signal and I want to listen to it, this is going to be great. If you're looking for lip sync, you may find that the size of that monitor is a little small. Next question.
From Brett Below in Appleton, Wisconsin. Thanks to Courtney and Paul Wallace, I just hopped on the tiny PC train. As a Mac user, I rely on Typinator for text expansion and previously used Text Expander until they changed to a subscription model. Is anyone using an app for Windows?
Courtney, do you do any kind of automation, like automated text expansion?
What by text expansion? What are they talking about?
So with Text Expander, yeah, exactly. With Text Expander, what you do is you can set up a series of with Text Expansion, for instance, I just say my address, and it just automatically fills my whole address into an email, or I say office address, and I do it all as one word, and it just so you can just have a key.
Programmed hotkeys, controlled hotkeys,
it's not really a hotkey as much as it is you type a phrase that is would not type otherwise, and it will it will automatically replace that with text. Go ahead, Chris. Can't hear you, Chris.
The way I used to use Text Expander until I killed it because they went subscription, I was a little angry. I find
angry?
that hard to believe, right? I find that a series of letters that are not in any word ever, like 4 S's in a row. 4 S's in a row types slice with the little backslash, which is our logo, which is a little awkward to type manually. Or like 3 C's or 3 F's or something like that. Text Expander used to have a great, it probably still does, but not in my universe, where I created a keyboard shortcut that would type the time of day in hours, minutes, seconds separated by colon, time of day time code. And I would use it on set while I was shooting. I would just have my laptop in front of me. I'd hit the keyboard shortcut and it would be the time. And then I'd take notes, good take, bad take, whatever. And it was really handy, because it would be like pulling time code out of the air, which when you're doing time of day time code is pulling time code out of the air. But I stopped using it when they went subscription.
Not that you're bitter. Next question.
Dave Kaufman from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. On an Atem, is there a way to add a key in preview so that I can crossfade from one camera to one with a key?
Go, Jesse.
We don't do this on the minis, and it's because of the risk involved of making a grand error publicly. There are 2 things that I can suggest. One is that you lean on your keys with cuts, and we do this quite a lot, is we set up our macros to cut from a non-keyed image to the keyed image that we want. And if we had to do a crossfade between a non-keyed image to a keyed image, the first thing I would do is feed the image to be keyed through a second Atem and marry all that information on one dedicated device and then move it into the Atem Mini. If you're working on something higher than the minis, you might be able to cross the finish line, but that's how I would approach it on something as limited as the Mini.
Go ahead, Chris.
What is Atem Toe's thing? Mix Effect Pro.
Yep.
Do it with that and a Stream Deck. So you could say, you could have a row of buttons like input 1 and Dave, it sounds like you mean with a key, meaning like a lower third strap. So you could have a button that says take 1, and then right above it would be take 1 with the key. Something like that.
Yeah, and just so you know, if it depends on what you're trying to key. If you're trying to key a lower third, there is a button above the timer in all the switchers that are called tie. And if you hit that tie button, it will load your lower third in. It'll tie that lower third to your preview. And then when you hit on air, it will bring that lower third in with your video. So if that's what you're trying to do, if you're trying to do lower thirds and you want to cut to it already built, you need to use the tie in the downstream key. And then when you go on air, it'll bring that forward, the video forward with the lower third inserted. So if that's what you're trying to do, it is there. Next question.
Brett Below from Appleton, Wisconsin. Do you recommend the BlackMagic Design Speed Editor, Keyboard, or Micro Panel for DaVinci Resolve for part-time editing? Or is it wiser to stick with a normal keyboard command and muscle memory and be able to easily move between any Mac or PC running Resolve?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I can only relate my personal experience with editing with Avid. I ended up buying their Artist Control, which had moving faders and a jog wheel and all that kind of stuff on it. And to be honest with you, it just sat there. I always went to the keyboard, from 99% of the keyboard shortcuts. If you're doing JKL, it's still the most efficient way to make things happen when you're doing an edit. So I'm recommending that you learn to do it the standard way with the keyboard and the shortcuts. You're going to be a better and faster editor without dealing with all these other external stuff.
Good, Bill.
I am firmly in the I like my basic unaffected machine for editing. I sit down at the laptop, I sit down at a desktop, I go to work for somebody else on an external project, and other than if I'm on an external project and I have to use a regular keyboard, I have to bring my touchpad because I have to put it centered on the keyboard just like my laptop that I use every day, so all my muscle memory works. Outside of that tiny inconvenience, I just like to be able to operate everything the same way all the time. That's the camp I will live in for the rest of my time.
Go ahead, Chris.
Brett, what you're doing here is you're building a Venn diagram of occurrences. So you already said you're a part-time editor, which means there's that circle is very small, and then you may be on different machines and you may have the speed editor with you. So how many times are all those things going to happen? I would highly recommend use the remote control that comes with your computer. On mine, it has 102 keys. It's called my keyboard. And just learn how to do that. If you did this full time, all day, every day, at the same desk with the same computer, yes, but I'm not a big fan of gimmicky remote controls.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm going to contradict myself or walk it back. I really like a good jog wheel. Not necessarily one on the artist control, which is plasticky and garbage, but on my shuttle, for example, on my BlackMagic design, and I think they carry that over to their other remotes, it's the go-to control because, being able to push it, click down, jog, scrub, spin, and have that feedback on it, that's something you can't do with a keyboard.
Go ahead, Bill.
And just a note, I was on a big crew once upon a time, and one of the editors had worked with a stylus to the right. Great editor. But trying to adapt that to the system we were working on, he struggled for 4 days trying to get that to work like it did at his home desk on this new system that he needed to be a part of the big crew on. And I'd never have forgotten that lesson. That was tough for him.
Next question.
Next one in from Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. Now that I have a few Windows PCs, is there any way to make mouse scrolling behavior work like a Mac OS natural setting?
Courtney?
I'm not sure what you're talking about with the Mac OS natural setting, but if you're talking about smooth scrolling, if you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, you can move the mouse over to the right side and click the mouse button, and that puts it into smooth scroll, variable speed smooth scrolling. So it'll do really smooth scrolling up or down or left or right, very natural scrolling. If that's what you're talking about, yes, it can be done just with a click on the mouse wheel to enable that when you're in the right side near the scroll bar in Windows.
Go ahead, Chris. Can't hear you.
All right. Courtney, in the Mac world, natural scroll has more to do with the behavior of touching an iPad versus scrolling a scroll wheel. So if you think about it, when I grab the little thing on the side on my Mac and I scroll down, the page goes up, right?
Right. You can put Windows in tablet mode, which will reverse scrolling.
There you go. That's it. That's the answer that Alexander's looking for. Tablet mode is what that you guys call it. Okay, cool.
Next question.
From Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. How much is Adobe Creative Cloud for Teams, and how many machines can you run on it? Can you run it on both your Mac and PC? Is 1 terabyte the upper storage limit, and will it play nice with Apple Photos and Google Photos?
Go ahead, John.
I think Mr. Fenwick can answer this question. He got a letter from Software Publisher Association about this question. It's about 1,020 a month for the Teams version. You get 1 terabyte of storage. I don't know what you mean by plays nice with Apple Photos and Google Photos. It doesn't integrate with either of those. You can move the files back and forth, but that's how much it costs.
Bill?
I would just say get every discount that you can, because I did a calculation. I've been using Final Cut for 11 years, and it cost me the $399 for that motion and compressor. I did, as just a joke for myself, figured out at their $49 a month how much that would have cost me for the other. It was over $10,000. Freaked me out. I wasn't expecting that.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, they seem to be pretty good about allowing you to use 2 machines on the same network, whether they're PCs or Macs. And I have 3 machines that I'm bouncing around on, and it's actually, they put an interface there so you can deselect one and select the other one. So it is fairly easy to use with 2 licenses, or 1 license for 2 users.
And Chris?
Technically, it's 1 license for 2 machines. It's not actually 2 users. If let's say, Mitch, you have an assistant that comes into your office and you want them to build a bunch of lower thirds on After Effects and Creative Cloud while you're editing in Premiere on Creative Cloud. That is not allowed. The two machines for one user, the intention in Adobe's mind is, yes, Mitch, you can put it on your desktop and we will let you put it on your laptop, but you can't have two humans running those two desks.
I guess a letter is forthcoming now.
Ignorance is bliss. Let me just say that. We figured it out, and it was a whole bunch of headaches.
There goes my plausible
We didn't
deniability.
figure it out. The Software Publishers Association, as John referred, figured it out for us.
How do they know if it's two different people?
COVID, when all the machines went to different IP addresses.
Office hours.
And Fenwick talks too much.
There you go.
Yeah, but that's the letter. The strictest letter of the law is two computers operated by the same human being.
There you go. Next question.
Thank you very much, Chris. Next question in from Douglas Carmichael. How well do help and sill pickups work for a piano in a church setting? I'm interested in getting a quality piano sound for both recording and streaming.
Good, Bill.
Well, you're looking for a quality piano sound, so I will just explain this little anecdote from my earlier life. I had a neighbor who was a great guy, and he was a piano technician for really, really, really big touring artists. The first thing they do is they take their baby grand piano that the set director says you should put on stage, and they rip out its entire insides and put a very high-level velocity sensing electronic keyboard in it, because pianos do not travel well. I would suggest that if you can find your pianist an electronic instrument that can plug directly, you're going to save a lot of problems rather than miking a real piano. The point of making this is that for touring musicians of a very high caliber, they are quite happy with the sound of electronic pianos. So if you can get that in direct, I think that's much better than going with trying to put pickups on a physical piano and get it mic'd.
Courtney?
Yeah, Help and Steel is not a microphone at all, really. It's an electronic pickup, like a guitar pickup, picks up it's a magnetic pickup, picks up the vibrations of the string in a magnetic field, so it has to go across every single string. And it's usually used in rock bands where you got a grand piano on stage, and that's why Bill says they've mostly carved out those Steinways and put electronic keyboards inside of them so that they don't have to deal with the Help and Steel. Because the Help and Steel then wouldn't pick up the ambient sound when you've got a row of Marshall amps on stage blasting at 4,000 dB. It's not going to pick up. It's hard to hear the piano over that if you're miking it. So the Help and Steel lets you pick up this piano sounds without picking up any ambient sound, or if the person is sitting at the piano singing or something to himself, like some annoying jazz pianists do. But other than that, you can, like Bill says, a solution for a touring artist who plays the piano is to put their favorite electronic keyboard in there, or a MIDI controller for their favorite electronic instrument. That way they can switch between different sounds of different sizes piano, upright, Steinway, Bosendorfer. You have all those overlays and all those samples that you can enter in there and change the quality of your piano at will.
Next question.
Mike Peters in Oakton asks, is 8 vMix call and 12 live-to-air inputs too much for a PC with an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2080 Ti?
I will guess yes. I think that you need probably a 4000 series to make all of that work at one time. I don't know that for certain. We haven't tested it specifically with that board, but I do not think that board will keep up with what you're asking it to do. Go ahead, John.
Is vMix call going away now that they integrated Zoom? That's the question.
Yeah, and I have to admit that I don't know if vMix it should. So they, if they're supporting Zoom, I would recommend it. Never found vMix call to be that stable. So I think there's a good reason why they should move there. And I think if you're going to do that kind of thing, I wouldn't use the vMix call. It's a real. Anyway, next question.
And a question from Eric Hers in Hartford, Connecticut. Would you use a B-Link-based encoder with an AJAU tap for SDI input, or must you have SDI capture integrated into one piece of hardware?
Courtney?
I think you can use an external SDI to USB converter, which is what I think that AJA UTAP is. It comes in over USB 3. Although it appears, since it's cross-platform and driver-free, I've got to assume that it's using the standard USB drivers for video. So it should work fine at 1080p. I don't know if it'll go higher than that. Whether or not it supports 4K or not is up in the air.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, asking, Zoom AI Companion is my trusted digital assistant that will empower me, and it is no extra cost with my paid account. What will it do?
Chris?
Likely, it will satisfy marketing's desire to put AI in everything on every web page so that people are interested and click on it. What it actually does, who really knows?
Yeah, it looks like it has some things where it can shorten things, summarize things, extend things. I think that I've talked to a couple people who use it who find that that it is, you can write a long. You remember that whole I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short one. Well, now you might have time. And one of the funny things is that I was talking to someone who they have a YouTube channel and they sell products. And people will buy their products, and the products are very high quality, and everyone's really happy with them. But you always end up with like 3 people that are really upset about something that happened, and they're not happy with the whole thing, and they write you angry emails, and you want to respond to them, and they find that's a taxing things both in time and their emotional state to deal with those folks that are just really a sore thumb about the whole thing. And so they just have the AI. They say, write this letter to this person and apologize for this. Tell them we'll send them another one or whatever they're going to say. And they just give it a couple, 3 lines, and it writes this flowery, long email that's quite nice. And they said it's much nicer than anything I would write. And it says everything I needed to say, and it has the person feel like they were heard. And it's just have my assistant write a long email to it. And in all fairness, my first job in TV was writing U1 emails, and they are a little bit of a grind. I work for Prime Sports Network as a production assistant, and it was every day and I automated it. So I had it randomly grab. I built a system that automated it within a couple weeks, so that I could just have it pass through the system, and it would automatically grab the names. It would grab a random version of like 5 different letters. So if 2 people at the same house got the same one, they wouldn't get the same letter, and it would look like it was typed. And even some of them had purposeful little. It was funny. Purposeful typos in them so that you felt like someone typed it to you, but it was nothing, And so it was. So I built all this up, and I would just hit go every day. So what took a day or maybe 3 or 4 hours to do, I reduced to 5 minutes, which allowed me to learn Photoshop. So, because I guess I took something that for years had taken someone half of the day to do, and I got it down to about 5 minutes. And then I spent that half of the day going through Photoshop books on the computer that I had access to, because I had Photoshop there and a little Mac, and learned Photoshop and Illustrator while I was automating it. So I get that. But the only thing that'd be a bummer is if they now know that they could do it, then I would never have a job. So that's the real challenge with all of this is the efficient assistants like me get weeded out early. Go ahead, John.
Along those same lines, there's automated tools to write reviews and reply to reviews based upon star ratings. I see them all over the place.
Yeah, it's a little. I think that it is a.
What's the point anymore? If all these computers are just sitting around talking to each other, what do they need us for?
Right, exactly.
I mean, honestly.
Well, so here's the thing that I will say is that it is as generally the chain reaction to something that becomes highly automated as people are looking for something that's not automated. So like you can mass produce, mugs, coffee mugs, that used to be made by hand. Like somebody used to make a coffee mug, like every coffee mug was made by a person, and they were expensive or more expensive because someone was doing them by hand. And then we have now machines that do them. They pump them out and by the thousands, and we buy them for $4 with a logo. And the thing is I don't value that as much. The ones that The ones that aren't powered, like the ones I have here that I buy, that I value, were obviously made by someone by hand. Like I like the wabi sabi kind of a feel of a mug that was handcrafted, and so I think that people will lean towards. I think some people will lean towards at the higher end will lean towards away from automation and towards those things. Mark my words. I think you'll see social net. I mean, you can see what's happening with X, formerly known as Twitter. I felt like X really should have looked more like the Prince logo, so it would have been closer. Anyway, so but they're talking about doing things that force it to be people as opposed to machines, and so I think that you're going to see social networks are going to start going away from automation and towards verification to make sure that what you're talking to is a person, not a machine.
Yeah. When I was a kid, real quick side story. We don't have a whole lot of questions. When I was a kid, I used to watch Romper Room, as many little kids did. And at the end of the show, Miss Marianne would hold up her magic mirror. They did some sort of circle wipe in it. And then she'd say, "I see," and she'd rattle off all the names of the kids that were watching it. And as a little kid, I used to watch that intently going, "Do you see me? Do you see me?" I was certain that Miss Marianne was going to say, "And I see Christopher, and I see Alex, and I see Bill, and I see John." And when I figured out that she was just randomly ripping off a bunch of names off the top of her head and she wasn't actually going to see me, that was the beginning of the thing that you see as Fenwick's rage in life. I was furious.
When you figured it out.
People want to talk to people. They don't want to talk to machines or Miss Marianne pretending that she sees people.
Somehow I can imagine like little Chris Fenwick angry.
Throwing stuff at the TV. Yes.
Like, I'm not watching you anymore.
She never said, "I see Courtney."
You're dead to me, Miss Marianne.
The birth of rage.
Next question.
How do you follow that? Okay, next question. It's Michael Marsh from San Anselmo asking, "I'm digitizing archival PAL VHS from a Panasonic AG-W1 deck. The picture's too bright, the whites are tearing, termination doesn't fix it, there's no time-based corrector available. Could it be a head cleaning issue?"
Mitchell?
It could be. It could be a bunch of other things, too. What I would do first is find a tape that you know has a good set of bars on it. And take a look at that. Does your machine that you're recording to know how to decode PAL? Because there's going to be a sync issue there, and that might be part of what's going on with the tearing. It could also be that the heads need cleaning. It could also be that the heads are toast, in which case you're really in trouble with an old VHS deck. So there's a lot of things that could be wrong. I'd go back and sort of eliminate as many things as you can by using a different tape that you know is a good standard of bars and tone on it.
Courtney?
Yeah, there used to be a big problem with encoding analog video into digital format, in that some systems use 0 IRE as black, and some systems use 7.5 IRE as black. And usually there's a switch in there that'll tell you so that your decoder or your input encoder actually treats the incoming video levels, signal levels, whether it treats a 0 IRE as black or 7.5. And that sounds like what may be the problem here. PAL, your colors are not going to come in correctly if you're set to NTSC. So make sure that your encoder accepts PAL, that you're bringing it into whatever you're using to bring it into the computer.
Go ahead, Chris.
Michael, it's good that you even know what a TBC is. I think one of the things that I have found frustrating in the last, several years of people pulling in old footage, and I don't know that I'd call anything off of VHS archival, but okay, old footage and not thinking about it and just digging it wrong. And you definitely want to fix it on the head end, garbage in, garbage out, and the better it comes in, the better you're going to make it look. I think the answer might be, although you don't have a TBC available, you may need to find one, and somebody's going to have it. And if I'm not mistaken, I think PAL, Courtney, was 0 was black, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, and there is a place in the South Bay, and I can't think of the name of it, but I'll try to find it, that specializes in fixing and supporting old videotape decks. So they're in San Jose, I believe. San Jose or Mountain View. I remember I ended up talking to one of them about that. So so take a look for that as well. We'll see if we can find it. Next question.
Hasma Kajar in Cape Town, South Africa, asking, Prompter People 24-inch has been my go-to meeting monitor. No concern on eye contact. Prompter now migrating to New Studio. For my everyday desk-based meetings, any cost-effective prompter.
Bill?
You say desk-based, so I think you're looking for something smaller. I'm using a 12-inch teleprompter, and I look back on my feed from Amazon to see what I bought. It is not this one. Mine is not available anymore, but this is the kind of thing I bought, and it has worked really well for me. It's, this is such a reasonably short distance. You don't need anything too big. And in my case, the key for me was getting the software that not only ran on the iPad, or in this case, the Lilliput monitor that I'm using to flip it, but even if you're using an iPad style, get a piece of software. I use a thing called Teleprompt Plus that does both the iPad but lets an iPhone control it. Having that ability to control it from your hand is
I think
real
that he's
easy.
mostly using it as an Interrotron. So when it comes to this, I don't think that.
Okay, so maybe it's not really a teleprompter case.
No, it's really just passing video in for eye contact.
Okay, that different circumstance.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
There is a 12-inch that is designed to work with an iPad from Glide Gear, and I've seen these for as cheap as $100. Fry's was selling them for $100 for a while. They're not very flexible. They're designed to fit on top of a tripod, but you can mount it on top of a stand instead of a tripod. And the main problem is the interface between the iPad. You'd have to put a monitor in there instead of using an iPad that has image reverse in it. But if you have a 12-inch monitor or something, that should work fine, and stick it in there. But it's designed, the clamp is designed to hold something as thin as an iPad. So you may have to adapt it somewhat to hold anything that's thicker than that iPad.
Go ahead, Chris.
I have a question just in general for the people that use iPads for a Interrotron, fold back. And I got to admit, if I did this, you realize I'm looking mostly at myself. So I would just pin myself in that thing. Sociopath.
Of course.
But when you use an iPad, the people that are using an iPad, are they using the sort of, what is in the Mac world? I don't know the PC. There's some way where you can make it be an extended desktop. Is that what you're doing?
Extended desktop? I am on mine, so I can drag things
off my
desktop.
Do you have to use a utility to do that, Bill?
No,
Apple does it now on the Mac.
Apple does it, yeah. It's just an outside monitor. If you hook it up via HDMI into your video system, it'll just see it and you just drag things to it and determine where around it you want it to be.
I mean, it will. I mean, Apple will now just see any Apple device that is within like a 30-foot radius of your computer and just go, "Would you like me to use that as a monitor?"
Even if it's wireless?
Sure. Yeah. And the latency is almost zero. I mean, it's I draw on it and I can't tell the difference.
Will it do it to my phone?
Yeah.
How does that? How come that?
I don't know if it does it with the phone, but it definitely does it with the iPad, the Air. It does AirPlay, and it's kind of an amazing. It's a little annoying and amazing because when you pop it up, you're like, "Hey, I've got all these monitors. Would you like me to use them?" And you're like, "No, I would not like you to use that."
I do use the continuity across the 4 computers that I have here, and I tell you, with the Studio, the iMac Pro, and the Mac Mini that has the 4 HDMI outputs, I'm going across 11 displays with one mouse. Well. It's pretty crazy.
Last question for the first hour.
Chester Sweeney, Las Vegas, asking, is the desk with your Zoom equipment and screens the same desk you do average pencil pen paper work on it, or is it a different desk?
Jesse, real quick.
We've got a desk for Zoom, a desk for editing, and a desk for writing.
Speed round, Bill.
One desk to fit them all. I just used one. This one.
John.
What's a pencil?
Yeah, exactly. Courtney.
Not even room to set a pencil down on mine, so no.
I don't have any pencils. I have some pens way over there that I use for marking things every once in a while. We're second hour, of course, we're going to talk about SuperSources here in just a second. Just a couple quick reminders that tomorrow we are going to be talking about, we had a little glitch in some of our recordings last week, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to start bringing some stuff up that, wasn't the end of the world, but it allows us to intellectually kind of talk through what those issues are and talk about pipelines and how we manage those pipelines. So that'll be on Wednesday. Thursday, still up in the air. We have it set up for midweek Q&A, but we may add something to that. So stay tuned for that for the email tomorrow. Friday, virtual control room. And this is Corey Benke from LiveX, and an old friend of mine. He's going to come on and talk to us about that. Of course, the weekend is Q&A, and Sunday is introspection. Introspection is, it's really there for us to just talk about what your questions are, concerns, complaints about office hours, so that we can talk through that, and more philosophical discussions in general about the process. Let's go ahead and jump into the second hour. And we're back. Welcome back to the second hour. Good to see you all. We're still playing with this. It was so much easier when we had a video to go to, but we're still not quite hitting the 8 o'clock right on the dot. We need to hang on that black for just a little longer, or our edits won't work. Anyway, we're working on it. So I'm sitting there watching it. If you're wondering why I'm looking over when we start this, I'm like, oh, did we hit the black on the right time? And we're still not quite hitting it right, but we'll get there. Today we're going to talk about SuperSources. Now, in the past, we've looked at SuperSources. We've discussed the SuperSource as far as looking at what other people are doing and talking about those things. And today, I thought we would talk a little bit more about the mechanics of SuperSources and really answer your questions. So it's a little slower moving. It's a little not quite as designed as just going through a whole bunch of other people's SuperSources, but really thinking about SuperSources and thinking about how they're used and really how they get constructed. Now, I'm calling them SuperSources because this is a term that BlackMagic kind of created for this. This is multiple windows that are up there. I think maybe the folks on the back end can throw us into a SuperSource so that we can make sure that we can define it here real quickly. If that's possible, I don't know. I have a couple. I think with the way our system works, a couple of you have to raise your hands. So a couple of our panelists, raise your hands right now. Raise your hands. There you go. And then I'll put them in here because I don't think we can do it if we don't have people actually in the system. So go ahead and go ahead and put up a SuperSource on the back end if you can. But what the SuperSource does, of course, is allow us to have multi-window. I don't know if that's possible for them to turn that on. So are they able to turn it on? Like just push SuperSource.
Would you like to SuperSource that?
I know. I think I don't quite understand why we can't do that. Anyway, so the SuperSource is it's a multi-window situation. Hold on, I'm just really confused here. Anyway, so I don't know if there's something. I don't know if we have somebody cutting that right now. There we go. So there's a SuperSource. So there's two of us there, and I think that there could be four of us there, or so there's two, but we'll stick with the four or the two here. So we've got the two SuperSources, the two of us up, Mitch and I, and the question is, there's a bunch of different things that happen with that window. Now, when you're looking at that window there, what you want to see is that there's two of us, but there can be 4, 8. As many as we have in the switcher allows. But what we have to do is we have to figure out what is that graphic that goes below it or above it. And so that's a key piece of that puzzle. Is being able to decide whether the video is sitting on top of the graphic or below the graphic. And there is a reason for that's important. Is that if you sit the video on top of the graphic, it means that it's easier for you to move around, and especially if you don't give it an outline. See the little outline that we have here? We're adding that to the SuperSource. That's not added to the graphic. And this depends on every switcher. So if you're using vMix or Mimo Live or other things. So this is why we want to kind of talk through some of these things, and we're trying to kind of talk them in more generalities, which is that inside of this, we can have that window that's there. Either have BlackMagic's not capable of this, but vMix and Mimo Live are, which is if I throw this window on top, the window that you see me in, and you see the little edge that goes around it. One of the things we really wish that we could have from BlackMagic is an edge, that went around it, that defined it on a BlackMagic. But otherwise, we take that edge off, which we can't do right now. The issue is that is that now you can move those graphics around very quickly. So you put them over top of a graphic, and now you can kind of rearrange where all those video frames look. So if you've got bigger ones. So sometimes you'll see in a broadcast, you won't see those edges because they're trying to just move things around, and they can lay those out very quickly. The advantage of putting the graphic over top, and so this is the artwork on top, and I'll show you some examples of that in a second. But the advantage of putting that on top of it is that you can move our windows underneath it. And so what that means is that we can't do this with this section, but if I do let's see here, you can go back to my single here, and I'm going to make sure that I have this up. Yeah, this is just a real quick example. And if we can come out of the SuperSource now, that'd be great. So yeah, okay. So so if I go into this, so now what you're going to see is you see me here, and I am underneath it. And the reason I have that there is so that I now can play with that SuperSource. So if I go into my presets here, and I can now start to move, you'll see me moving around back and forth here. Now you'll see that I'm underneath. See how my video is now underneath that SuperSource, and that's important because, and if we can move this down a little bit.
BlackMagic calls this a foreground graphic.
Artwork.
The industry term is typically a mortise. It's called a mortise.
Right.
Which is just a graphic with a hole in it, and it makes it easier to zoom in and recrop. And
yeah, and so a lot of them, yeah, you can see what's happening here. So if I make mine just a little bit bigger, what I don't have to do, I only have to worry when it gets over. See how that one piece has come over here? So this is what you have to think about when you're building these is the only thing you have to figure out is that with your video here of it popping over on top of that. And so the mortise is a, it's useful, in the sense that now I don't have to, my precision, it'll always, these areas here are always going to line up, and I can just move my videos around, and they're all inside of something as opposed to on top of something. The downside of that is that if you want to change this design, you can't just move the windows around. You have to actually go back into your whatever you're using for design. In this case, I did this actually. One of the things to note is to build this example just as an experiment, I typically use Motion for most of my my SuperSources, but I actually use Keynote for this. So this is Keynote, to lay this little one out. I used Keynote because I wanted to see, it was actually based on, I had something else set up, but I was talking to someone about it, and they're like, well, I don't have Motion, and I don't have Photoshop, and I don't have these other things. And so Keynote will actually let you cut this out, this system out, and this is using the Boolean functions inside of Keynote. So you basically put the windows where you want them. So I'll show you here let's see here. I'm going to go back to my full screen, and I'll bring you into Keynote here for a second. And you can build these in anything. Anything that can build something with an alpha channel is all you need to do here. But if I go into Keynote here, you'll see this is, so what I have are these windows, and this is just a window here. I think I'm going to grab another one here. So now I have, these are individuals. And what's nice about this is I can figure this out, have the rounded corners. That's one thing you can do with a mortise that you can't do with when you have the regular videos is have a rounded edge. Anyway, so you have this, you have these here. And what I'm going to do is simply, I select this one, and you can't see it because it's under format, but it's on my other screen. I apologize for that. And I subtract the shapes, and I just deleted one. Hold on. I think I somehow grabbed that. This worked so well a second ago when I was doing this. So I grab this. Oh, yeah, because it is because the other one fell behind it. So if I format this and I go, this is subtract shapes under shapes and lines. And then if I send this one to if I put this one on the back, you'll see the
what I do when I deal with transparency in Keynote is I'll make the background color a silly, super bright pink, just so I can see that it's doing it. And then before I export the image, I change the background to none. Because for whatever reason, I think Photoshop might have a lock on the little grid pattern that usually
I don't know if they
denotes
do.
transparency?
I really do wish that Apple did do that. So it'd be nice.
You mean the
to have that.
checkerboard?
Yeah,
The
the
checkerboard.
little
Checkerboards are
checkerboard.
used in a lot of things. I don't think that's.
Well, I don't know
so
why
what you're
Apple
talking
doesn't
about is
play
using
along.
this color. So you're saying like that, or something, so that you can see that it's.
Now I know that blue thing has has 2 holes in it. And then before I change it, I export it, I change my background image to none. And
Let's go back here.
And it'll look like black, but it's not actually black. It's actually transparent.
Right. And so if you're playing, the reason that I'm showing Keynote, whether you're using Keynote or PowerPoint, which PowerPoint will do all of this as well, is that it's a really fast way to build out your super sources. So a lot of people feel like they have to have Photoshop or something like that. In many ways, there are tools in here that make this easier, because if you go in here, I can go, like before I cut them out, that's the one thing that makes it a little harder. But before I cut them out, I can sit here and just kind of play with these. I don't know why I would do a super source that way, but let's see here. And the nice thing about it, is that if you select these and you want to center them, all that stuff is all stuff that just happens pretty automatically with Keynote. And so anyway, so those are the kind of things that you can kind of lay out. But especially, I've gotten into using Keynote as a layout tool. Let me see. So, to lay things out and figure out what I'll go back to my full screen here. But I've kind of started to use Keynote as if I'm trying to think about stuff. In fact, I use Keynote for laying out lots of things. Anytime I make a suggestion about how something should look, I've kind of decided to use Keynote for most of those things, because it's a lot faster than Photoshop or Illustrator for me to just figure the layouts out. So, the main thing is that as you start to figure these out, one of the things you want to think about is why you're doing what you're doing. So we have a couple different super sources. We're not going to try to go through them here, but in one case, we want a super source that is everyone that's about to ask the question. So we have, a lot of times you'll see us, as you start to think through these.
Look at us right here. Here's the 4 people that raised their hand finally.
There's the 4 of us. So anyway, and this, by the way, if you're wondering why we have that little head thing that we use, there's a couple of reasons, but a big reason that we use a head guide is so that everybody's heads in a super source match. So so a lot of times what we do is in fact, we're working on something else where the user will always see that little head, a very, very subtle little head there to kind of keep them guided towards where to go, so that our super sources work. And so I think that Zoom should incorporate that. So we just turn it on and everybody sees the little circle of like, hey, you're in or you're out. But it does make the whole super source look a lot more natural, that you can see here. So I think that is, but this one here is the next 4 people that are going to talk. In some cases, especially if we're not ready for that, we have another super source that is just me and the question asker, that is, or Mitch today. So we're going to go out of that and probably go back to that. But and those are 2 up. In our case, that's sometimes a safety, because we don't have no one's raised their hand in time, or we don't have their hands up. So this is the one that we have here. Other things you have to think about when you think about super sources, of course, is also this area down below. So this area here. When you build a super source, you have to think about what else is going on in the frame. So a super source very rarely does it exist like you see it here, which is by itself. Usually there's a question, there's a comment, there's tickers, there's bugs, there's all these other things. So the super source sits inside of all of those things. Other things that we like to do, or that I like to do anyway, is I tend to make my super sources a cool color in nature. And you'll find that in general, backgrounds for me are almost always cooler colors and not warmer colors. And the reason I do that is because then they don't compete with people's skin. And so it creates I think that people look better if you have the background be slightly darker than they are, and cool colors, whether it's green or blue, in purple in some cases. But as you start to move into those warmer colors, the yellows, the reds, and everything else, I find that in whites, people use white in the super source, they really do. As you start to do that, you make the people look drab. If you wonder why I do so much, where I spend so much time building gray backgrounds and low contrast backgrounds and everything else, it's so that people stand out. And so when you think about your super source, you also want to think about what that means as well. Now, the cool thing about the about a lot of these things is you can build those mortises that Chris talked about. Are interesting. One of the things that we've had challenge with, and I don't have the example here with it, but we get into a situation where you have a client that wants a mortise that is, this person, however they're cut out, but they want to animate this. And the problem is they end up having they have some extra pieces around the mortise. We've had some entertainment clients really want this to look like a, kind of a cool frame. This is hard. To do it in most things. It's easier in a software switcher. So if you're using a Mimo Live or a TriCaster or vMix, this is not hard. In a hardware switcher, it's kind of designed to cut out and be something in the foreground. And so what we've done here to make these work inside of an Atem, and again, I know that people using vMix and TriCasters and Mimo Live will tell me that, well, this would be easy in there. So you're right. I'm just going to let you know you're right. On a switcher, we go from one switcher to we have a lot of switchers in the office, and we literally apply the mortises to each person and send them out into the other switcher with the mortise and the alpha channel already or over black, so that we can key them back in over top of it in the second switcher. It works. It's just a little funky. Anyway, so but that's that is the nature of that process. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to show, if you don't mind, the thing that you tried to do, but we couldn't see the menu that you did. And I got to say, I've never actually done it this way using Keynote, but as usual, Alex has a great idea. So here's the thing, and this curve thing is editable. So I can make it more editable. I can bring this over, option drag another window out, and I can get them centered. And if I needed to, I could do a 4-up very quickly. Okay, boom, boom, like that. And then get them centered. So what I do, this is my background. So this is just a solid fill. And you can see that the slide background is color fill, and it's filled with the color fill of white. So just to be sure, I'm going to make it, a silly background. So now I know that's the background. But if I come over here and change it to no fill, it's transparent, although transparent in Keynote looks like black. So I'm going to go back to the color fill, and I'll recenter my background image. And this is the part that was on, well, that was weird. I accidentally typed. This is the part that was off screen for Alex. So if I select all 4 of these and the background, and I go to Format, Shapes and Lines, Subtract, and there's my background image. So, and I think, can I still, no. Now those images those frames are gone. They were just used to cut the hole. And that's why probably a good idea would be to duplicate this frame in case I want to go back to using this exact frame.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the fallback on the
subtract.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then the last step is I then want to go to my slide and change my current fill to none. It will look black, but this is actually a purple thing with 4 holes in it.
Yeah, and I will say that it's a really fast way to mock up ideas, for this, and really using. And it was kind of an epiphany that I had of, I could just use it, because I use Keynote a lot for a lot of these things, just because it's really fast, and I can save it and I can send it to somebody and they can look at it and they can do stuff. And so, like for instance, I've kind of moved, with my countdown clocks, I build the countdown clocks in Motion, but I realized that, Keynote can put them out as well. And if they're not moving, if the only thing that's moving is the countdown clock, I just export the countdown clock out as its own layer and then bring it in. I think Keynote should build its own countdown clocks. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But I think that it would be, then I can just move things around if the client says they want to do something that's really, really fast for me to do it. Go to Courtney.
Yeah, I was going to ask Chris, once you create that mortise in Keynote, do you export that as a PNG with an alpha layer?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other question I had is I don't have a extreme, and I know we're using a constellation which has 4 or 6 inputs, reentry points on the SuperSource.
So you can do the again, when you're using the software one, I think I don't know if there's any limit to the number of windows that you can make except for your GPU. So CPU.
No, but
GPU,
I'm talking about the Atems,
right.
yeah.
For the Atem, they are limited. Each SuperSource is limited to 4, but there's 2 SuperSources in the constellation, and there's 1 SuperSource in the mini extreme. And again, I will say that if you're using a BlackMagic, we're not going to get into it too deeply here because it really kind of deserves its own second hour, and maybe we'll do this again soon. But you should not do SuperSources in a BlackMagic switcher without MixEffect Pro. MixEffect Pro is a $50 app. It transforms the SuperSources into something that's usable.
So my other point was that in the software control for BlackMagic, you have the DVE tab, which gives you the settings as to what's going to go in each SuperSource window, essentially.
Well, you don't use the DVE tab itself. You use the I believe
SuperSource. Yeah, I understand that.
SuperSource one. Yeah.
But do you have? My question is, do you have all these controls like? You have position, you have size, so you can scale the image that goes into each SuperSource. You have mask, so you can turn that on or off. And you have shadows, drop shadow, and you have border, which you were complaining about. You couldn't set a border.
No, you have that in DVE, but not in SuperSource.
I see. So you don't have all of these same controls in SuperSource, although it does use the same type of compositor. Yeah.
Yeah, it does, but you don't have shadow or, not that I'm bitter, but you don't have shadow or border, no.
But you can pre-program in, which MixEffect Pro does, where he programs in moves and scales like this. So you have a set A and a set B.
The challenge,
and it'll do a move between those 2 points, yeah.
Yeah, and the challenge really is that whole moving, if you're moving the SuperSource, so the challenge you get yourself into is if you're trying to do an animated move from one SuperSource to another SuperSource, that is where MixEffect Pro works well, but you can't use a mortise in the way that Chris was talking about, because the mortise now is
you have to use the original
dynamic
video windows, which it's controlling the video in the actual windows.
Yeah, the
mortise is just a single overlay. Yeah.
Yeah, the tricky way to do that is to you can pre-key the video with curved edges, and then you can animate between the two. So you pre-key it before it goes in. I once did a show where we had a lot of zooming up and down. Like, one of the things I used the SuperSource for is I had 2 people being interviewed, and I wanted, when the one person starts talking, when the guest starts talking, I want their window to get bigger and the other one to get smaller, and then I just kind of keep moving back and forth with those, and literally with again, with software it'd be easier. But with MixEffect Pro, I had a whole constellation and everything else, and I cut the whole show on an iPad, just tapping 3 or 4 different little icons. Oh, I want to go to this. I want to go to this. I want to go to this, and it felt weird to be cutting an entire, because it was just 2 people talking, but cutting an entire show for 60,000 viewers on 4 things on my iPad was a very weird experience, but it worked. And so anyway, so I think but that's the kind of thing that you want to, that you can think outside the box, and where can I, it's just understanding the stack and deciding where to key it. And again, I will say that SuperSources, mortises, multiview, whatever you want to call them, this is where software switchers do look, often do better. The only challenge with the software switchers is that you can start doing things that they can't do on your computer. So you have to be very careful of how much processing power is there. You were going to say something, Chris?
Yeah, I don't know how relevant this is, although it could be quite. I just got a message from Tuomo, and he is about to release SPX graphics for Zoom version 1.0.
Yeah.
And he said that there is a image layer capable. So you could, in essence, build a mortise inside of Zoom and use SPX graphics. And he's watching right now. So, hey, Tuomo.
Tuomo, you come on. Ping us if you're ready to show it. Let us know when you're ready to show the new SPX for Zoom. Even if you want to give us a preview, you could do that too. So
he says it hurts my. He was asking if we could use the Fenwick Framer and have it be preset as a thing in there. I said, of course. He says it hurts my eyes when people join Zoom and all I can see is their forehead. It hurts my soul, Tuomo.
Yeah, I just think I'd love to have a meeting where I can just subtly turn it on and you see like a little circle. We don't have to tell you what it is. It's just like a little circle. People will find their head. They'll just kind of move around. Once they realize what it is and they realize everybody else is using it, you don't have to say anything. You just put it on.
I do it in tech checks all the time when they have like a pre-meeting and you put them in and you see the people go, oh.
Yeah. Find their space. Or they get mad and bitter. Go ahead, Bill.
Just the power of mortises in general. I used them a lot on the very first Office Hours music video. I had so many sources doing so many things that the ability to go in and reframe shots, because most of these shots were a little off balance one way or another. So I was constantly zooming in, zooming out, trying to figure out what people wanted to see, whether I wanted to do 2-ups, 3-ups, pop people into the middle of things. And without the use of this mortise idea, this is incredibly difficult to do. When you build a series of mortises that allow you to just put a video down there and then put whatever content you want into it, make it as big or as small as you want, it saves hours of fiddly work. Now, you can only do this for things that you're producing, not for live, but without mortises, that would have been an impossible task.
Let's go to the first question.
First question from James Fosline in Minneapolis, Minnesota. After playing with motion replicators for a bit, I'd love a SuperSource lab. Anyone up to doing something today after the show?
It's very hard for us to organize lab. We don't find that labs right after shows work well. It's just that it's hard to get people to show up because they weren't ready for that. They've got other things planned in the day. Doing a SuperSource lab later in a week or two, I think is a totally doable thing. Doing it today probably wouldn't happen. I will say that motion and the replicators are exceptionally good for doing SuperSources, where I've built a lot of them. And the big advantage with that is that, I don't know if I can put it together fast enough, but the big advantage of the replicators is that you can loop them easily. So let me see if I can pull one up quickly here. Let's see if I can. There we go. This one probably won't be the best, but let me see if I can pull it up quickly. Just going to see if I can find in the behavior, let's see. This one doesn't have it. In the sequence, hold on. Sequence setting. Let's see, spread loops. Yeah, so let me pull this over so you can see it. This is not a great example of it, but I'll just show you this. This is the secret sauce to motion, which is, so if you look at motion here that has, I have a little replicator here that's doing this. This is not a good example of what you'd want to do for background. That would make everybody crazy. But it's built, it has one little setting inside of your sequence, inside of the replicator and inside a sequence. You have one thing that's called loops. When will this sequence control loop? So you're building the sequence and it'll loop every 3 seconds. And what that means is that you can build perfect loops inside of this every single time. So if you want it, obviously you would typically have it be a lot slower than what this is showing, but you can do something where you can build it so that any kind of replicator that you're using inside of motion will automatically loop at a certain rate. So that way you can build a SuperSource that always has these kind of slow moving loops that are in the background, and they're always going to end, so there's no hops, there's no hiccups. Now the other way to do that is to do a back and forth. So you go out and then you reverse it and come back. But that can be obvious in some cases. And so having something go by and being able to create a perfect loop is something that motion does. And there's not a lot of other things to do it well without more work. So if you have replicators, they'll do all of that for you. And it's really powerful. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
And if you're interested in motion and replicators, the single guy I go to always for my motion stuff is Mark Spencer at Ripple Training. Mark is an absolute master at motion. And I think if you just search for some of his YouTube tutorials, it'll probably get you a long way. I agree. I think the $49 you can spend to add motion into your ecosystem is probably the single most efficient use of money in the world. That is such a deep and fabulous program.
It really
is so cheap.
It is.
It's crazy.
It's a crazy, like for $50. I mean, just as a countdown clock generator for me, even though it's not perfect at what it does, it's just super fast and easy, and it just works. Same thing with the replicators. Just that one thing that it does is worth a lot of the trouble of just if you're building any kind of looping background, using the replicators to do that makes it infinitely
I've solved
easier.
$1,000 problems in 5 minutes using this $49 tool. It scares me.
Next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland asking, we have an Atem 1ME 4K. Can we bodge a SuperSource with DVE and PInP, etc.?
You can kind of do it with the 1ME. I will say the number one reason to get a 2ME is because the SuperSource comes with those 2MEs. The only 1ME that I know of that does the SuperSource is the Atem. I think maybe the new 1ME may have a SuperSource in it, but I thought it didn't. You can kind of do it. You can get a couple. You can get DVE will give you picture-in-picture, but you're not going to get the multiple sources that you need for that. Next question.
From Narcisse by Faith, I would like to reproduce sort of the same multiview with lower third and text appearing on gallery view in office hours. I have the multiview 16 and an Atem 4ME Constellation HD with a decklink quad 2. I would appreciate it if you could guide me with a step-by-step.
Yeah, so the way we do, I'm just looking at this real quickly here. So we're doing ours with MixEffect. Well, we're doing a mixture of MixEffect Pro and SPX. So SPX is what generates all the graphics that we use for what we're doing. And then so that lower third that pops up, that's all generated by SPX. And that is using a PC with Casper. And so that does a key fill out from that PC into our switcher. So that's what's generating the lower third there. The big multiview is we're actually using a multiview 16 and in most cases. And then we have to build different mortises. Here we go. This is the 6 of us up. And the problem with the multiview 16 is that you can have 6. I mean, you can have 4, 9, or 16. So right now, we might want to organize this in a slightly different way, but we have a 9 up. So if we're less than 9, we're going to do a 9 up, and so those are our choices there as far as making it work. So it works with 6 people. It looks pretty nice. With 5, it doesn't look as nice. And so that's the thing that we have to kind of look at. But that mortise, we have to build a mortise for every option up to 16. And so, knowing that's out there. So that mortise is sitting over top of all of those things. And the reason it sits on top is because we want to have those little nice rounded edges, which I think add a little bit to it. I feel like it looks, hard. The hard edges look a little garish. So having the little rounded edges there is the graphic that sits. So that graphic is over top of us, cutting us out. And so what it looks like it's behind us, it's actually on top of us, basically masking out our corners and, setting us up then. And that's the 4 up there that you can see. So you can have 4, 16, 9 with that. And so that's not using a traditional SuperSource, that's just using a multiview. And again, when you start getting into that, this is where it goes the other direction, where it gets a little harder from a CPU perspective to generate all of these frames at a very low latency. So generating 9 or 16 sources at a very low latency through a computer is something that we've been struggling with because it'll add latency to the process. And so it's that 16 still works well for us in that case. Next question.
From Georgie Chantvari Bortnik from Swissvale, New Hebrides, due to how it's designed in terms of processing and chip power, the way BlackMagic manages its SuperSource feature for compositing and layers can be very different from the rest of the industry. How do we translate lessons from this hour to other gear?
Well, I think mostly it's why we mostly talked today about the design of them and how we get over them and so on and so forth, and less about the mechanics of a BlackMagic switcher. So I think that from a SuperSource perspective, the main thing is really thinking about across any of these platforms. Are you putting the videos over top? Are you putting them underneath? Are you and I think that one of the things that we, again, if you look back at older versions where we've looked at SuperSources, I tend to like my SuperSources to be a little out of focus, a little cool, and not moving a lot, because I find them to be distracting. I was watching Monday Night Football last night because the Steelers were playing, and their SuperSources went from being, it's just too much. It's just too much. It's like you allow them, well, they just have this huge Monday Night Football thing above it, and it's got all this stuff on it, and it's super garish. And the only thing that was worse than the design for the Monday Night Football stuff was the fact that they were playing 2 games at one time, which doesn't make any sense. Anyway, because all the people watching the football game know who they're watching. They don't need to see both games at the same time. And it was just annoying. It was just a disrespect of the entire experience. Anyway, but if you go back and look at the Monday Night Football stuff in their SuperSources, they have all these mechanical everything else, and it kind of looks cool, but like from a 90s perspective, like 90s or early aughts. It's not. It doesn't feel like it's kept up. It's not clean, and it's a little rough. And so you do want to think about that SuperSource. The more you make it a thing, the more careful you have to be with it. I think that if you look at the Sunday Night Football and the Thursday Night Football, you'll see a much better designed and more subtle look at SuperSources that really looks good. But as the SuperSources, with everything else, it should be something that serves that market, serves the viewer, not something that overwhelms the viewer or calls itself out, in my opinion. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, just the terminology. I mean, BlackMagic came up with the SuperSource idea. Basically, it's a 4 DVE input, which would be in a ROS or I guess Chris will probably know a lot more about this than I do because I haven't been in that situation as a TD for many years. But they used to call them multiple reentry switchers. And so each DVE layer, mix effect layer, will take a video source and deposit a second video source in a window somewhere on top of or underneath that other video source. And then if you have 2 of those, you can take the output of one ME bus and input it to the next ME bus and put a second picture on top of that. And then same thing with the third and the fourth. So it's eventually adding layers for each ME bus on your switcher. And BlackMagic just does that digitally and gives you 4 ME buses with DVE effects to be able to scale, size, crop, position each one of those video inputs separately without having to give you all the buttons for an ME bus to control each one of them. You have to go behind the scenes and set up your SuperSource ahead of time. It'd be tough to do because you don't have all those buttons exposed on a live switcher.
Go ahead, Chris.
I think, Courtney, typically the term re-entry meant that like ME, and again, I think Grass Valley and BlackMagic do this differently. In Grass Valley, which is, the godfather of switchers, ME1 is the furthest from your belly, and then 2, 3. And a re-entry is when you had the output of ME3 was also an input back up on ME1. That's typically what they refer to as a re-entry. What you're talking about, the way I used to do it is we would use DVEs, outboard devices, where each channel of the DVE had its own router into it, which could be an output of an ME, but typically just a cuts-only router. And you would pump, camera 1 into channel A and camera 2 into channel B. Very similar to the way it works on a BlackMagic. But again, it was a whole lot of hardware, a whole lot of extra stuff. But I think that re-entry typically means folding a low ME back up into a high ME.
And one of the things this is one of the reasons you have multiple MEs. So if you were wondering, like, why would you need more than one ME? And I'm showing it in a small 1 ME, but the real thing is that you can build these SuperSources and design them and everything else in another ME and be able to
leave it alone. And now it's just a cross point on your program bus.
Yeah, you're just cutting to it. And, so there's a lot of, so that's one of the reasons we use the second ME or third ME or fourth ME is to build graphics or build support graphics, because then you can also do things like you can have one ME be the SuperSource, but another ME is serving that one ME is like ME3 might be serving a video into one of the windows for ME2. So now you're cutting a show inside of a SuperSource that is then being delivered to program. And so that's another mechanic. We're showing the most basic version of this, but MEs. And the reason you do that is like in the news where you have your host, here, and then you have the larger, shot here, and you're cutting a show here, right? You're like literally cutting a show of, different, let's just say it's breaking news, and the host is sitting here talking about it, but you need to cut to different sources. You might even have lower thirds. You might have all of these things that are happening inside of this, and you're having it happen inside of one ME, and then it's passing that into the SuperSource is not looking at a camera source, it's looking at an ME. So it's saying looking at the program of ME3 as in ME2 or ME4 or whatever, and so that we're able to cut the program in that SuperSource there. So that, I think that's the why you start stacking these MEs up. Go ahead, Chris.
What I would say to people is, if you don't know that you need multiple MEs, you probably don't. But when you figure out, I wish I could, then you need multiple MEs.
Yeah, and
that's the way I would describe it.
Yeah, I wouldn't. At home in my office, I have this mini Extreme, and it's perfect, great little size, and doesn't make a lot of noise. And I have more keys than I'll ever use, more buttons than I'll ever use. But I won't do productions without at least two. I don't do productions with one MEs. Although we did do one where we had 8. I actually did it. I bought them for the project. We bought 8 1MEs, and then we used each one of them basically as an ME. So we had 8 MEs. And the reason we were doing this is we were doing we're covering games. And so each switcher became a way that we could design the graphic of how the person's going to look with a DVE, and we'd have all this stuff that was all built in. And then they were all feeding into a bigger switcher so I basically built a 12 ME switcher out of a 4 ME and an 8 1MEs. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, we used to call them quad splits, and we'd build them in a DVE with the different channels, and we had the control, and pretty much build it the way you were just saying. We used to use a kaleidoscope, because that was the old Sony mixer or Vision mixer.
A quad split could also just be a wipe, though. It could be just a wipe.
It was probably based on that.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is here with a question. If you wanted to display hymnal lyrics along with a display of the pastor and choir in a church environment, would it be easier on the viewer to use a SuperSource of the music and the pastor choir, or use follow the bouncing ball lyrics on the lower third?
Go, Bill.
That's really an aesthetics question, and the reason I say that is because I always think first and foremost, what am I directing the eye of my viewer to do? I have seen people get into trouble with too much action on the screen. So if you're doing a lot of quick cuts of the congregation of individuals, and you have something at the bottom that is pulling up lyrics, and you're trying to get a shot keyed over that of the pastor who's speaking, to me, it's like they're getting confused. And the more elements I have on screen, the better I think my design needs to be and the clearer. I mean, if it's just a Christmas service and I want to put a snow background and do SuperSources on top of that, great. I don't think I'm going to confuse anybody, and they'll read the lyrics when they want to read the lyrics, and they'll look at the people when they want to look at the people. But if it gets too confusing, I think you've overdone it. That's my philosophy anyway.
And go ahead, Chris.
I would just do what everybody else does. Take the current line, or maybe 2 lines that people are singing, and drop it in as a lower third. That way you can cut behind it. You can see reactions. You can see the band, the singers, etc. Whoever's advancing the graphics has to pay attention, though. Otherwise, it gets really awkward, and you get a lot of people looking around the room going, "What's going on?"
Yeah, one thing, as you would start adding graphics, you definitely add more responsibility to make it, of things whoever's running it to pay attention. Next question.
Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. What are the layouts which work best for presentation purposes with 2 or 3 speakers and a presentation running?
So what I recommend for a lot of these things is to really think about watch TV. Try not to watch corporate broadcasts. Don't use that as your model, because it's usually pretty bad. And so really think about how you might want to think about broadcast. So think about your whatever you're streaming as a show, not as a corporate broadcast, because we get into these things where we get these horrible, like, here's your thing, and now we're going to have a guy over here, and he's going to talk, and it's just going to stay frozen that whole time, and you don't need to do that. So what I would do with this, if I had 3 speakers talking, I would probably build it this way, and I'd probably build them down the side, but I'd only bring them up at certain times. I'd pop into them. What I wouldn't do is leave them up. So the thing to remember about, in general, in most of our life, unless something's going horribly wrong, everything is continuous and nothing moves very fast in front of us. So in front of our eyes, things evolve. We're walking, we're looking at things. Things don't change. You're in a pretty fixed frame most of your life. When you edit, you're creating a violent action to your brain. Like if you're watching something, every time it cuts, that's not something you see in nature. And so cutting, actually, you don't want to cut too often unless you're, there's some YouTubers that love to cut every couple seconds. But generally, when you cut, you want to give people a time to, and Chris can talk more about it, of a pacing, but you want to create some energy with those edits, or give people time to sit and watch what's going on. So the balance here really is, you can go to the SuperSource, and when they're interacting with each other, I think it makes sense to have them all up there. If one person is presenting for a little while, which I don't recommend, by the way, is that I would sit there. And one thing that you can have a lot of fun with is, remember when you build these out, if you really think about the layers, one of the things that I like to do is, if I know where the presentation is, I might actually build their SuperSource to go over top of the background like that, and kind of like little flags like that. This is you need a little bit of a mortise to hide this, but you build this out so that they sit over top of each other. And then you have to understand your layering of these videos to make that actually work. But the nice thing about it is it kind of, it gives it a little bit more of an artsy look, because no one ever sees that. No one ever sees the weird things that people don't see very often in broadcast, is one video overlapping another video, and another thing is rounded corners. So I tend to use both a lot when I'm building these things out, as I build these little systems out, so that I can do things that kind of break something that you're used to. So anyway, so that's something to kind of think about there. But again, I would really strongly consider coming back to a full frame as often as you can, and letting people watch what's there. But cutting to the person. So one of the things that we talk about when someone's doing a presentation is, if they're looking down, then cut to the screen. If they're looking up to the TV, then cut to them. And you can go back and forth a little bit, but just this mechanical, and then we have to train the speakers to do that, is when you're talking to your screen, look at your screen. That tells us when to cut to the screen, and it's fine if it's not perfect, because as they look down, it kind of tells the viewer you're about to go to the screen that they're looking at, and then they're going to talk about it a little bit, and they're going to look up to say something to someone. And that, I think that if you can get into that dance with your speakers, I think it's as good as you're going to make it. But again, I would highly recommend, I know that you're going to be asked, because this is what corporate does, but people talking for half an hour is a really low yield impact on the viewers, because most people tune them out. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, in terms of directing something like this, Stefan, I always say that everything on screen has to have meaning and purpose. It has to be done purposeful. Yeah. I can remember early on in my career cutting a show for a director, and we got 35, 40 minutes into something, and he said this out loud. He goes, "Camera 3, dolly right, let's try something new." And I was like, "Why?" "Well, I'm just getting bored." Okay, so you're serving yourself and not the viewer. And you're not serving the content on screen has to be presented. It doesn't matter if you're bored. You don't just change camera shots because you're bored. The camera shots should have been picked out purposefully before you started. And now it's a game of endurance. And granted, it's not exciting, but it is the information at hand, and you have to be thinking of it in terms of the person who's actually watching it. And yes, you can make formulas like Alex mentioned. If you look down, cut to this. If this happens, cut to that. But even formulas break. And the real trick to directing something that's not exciting, which has been my career, is, do you have the endurance to get through it and follow the action? The other thing about like a multi-camera, like an interview where people interacting, as Alex was mentioning, imagine that you are standing around in a circle at a party and you're all holding a long neck and you're having a conversation and people are talking. Who are you as the person who's not talking? You're just listening in. You're eavesdropping on the conversation. Who are you looking at? What are you looking at? The person talking might be saying something funny, and you want to see, does the other guy chuckle? And as a good director, you're going to be watching that frame going, oh, here he goes, take two, and you're going to get that chuckle. It might be nice to have a 2-up. You might want to go to the quad split or the 4-up, the SuperSource, whatever you want to call it today. But follow the action. Everything has to have meaning and purpose. I joke that directing's really easy. You just put moving lips in every frame, but not necessarily. Sometimes you need to see the thing. And then the
level 1 of editing is lips and frame. Level, you go into expert level, you start doing what Chris is talking about. But, a lot of times what happens is we have 20 rooms to cover and I don't have that many great TDs.
And it's hard.
And so a lot of times what I do is I go, well, I just need you to
follow these rules. Agreed. But what I'm saying is to really follow it well, you begin to understand what great directors are. And I will say I've had the opportunity to work with some really good directors in my career. And I've had some opportunities to work with directors that were really bad. And I learned from both of them.
We're getting a little bit into a tangent, but I think it's worth it. The good TDs that are manageable can follow the rules and give you a solid show that just feels like you don't notice it, right? That's a good TD. Like there's many shows that I just need a good TD to just make sure that you don't notice the bad edits. You don't notice that you're hanging on someone too long. You don't notice that you're cutting away to someone that doesn't matter. All those things just to be an invisible. That's table stakes. Great TDs are the ones that are curious. Like they're listening for something. They're hearing the story. They're jumping around. They're going, I wonder about this, and they're following their interest in what the person's talking about, and they're just kind of following it around. And they're curious, and you can see that curiosity in their edit. Exceptional TDs are the ones that are creating. They're telling you a story. They're 8 edits ahead. They're thinking about this, and they're building this. They're not just following the story curiously. They're wrapping a story around and creating something for you to see. And it's outside of that. And you can hear them calling, hey, Jib, I'm going to have you do this, 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 and this. When I say go, I need you to do this and build it up. And I'm going to have you do this. And you can hear, like when, we work with Marcia or Nate or others, you can hear them building this. I'm going to go into this sequence of shots that are going to set this all up for you. And that's a different set of plans, for that process. And that's well, ratchet up. The ones that you notice the bad edits, those are the ones we try to not to either train or move on. Next question.
Georgie Champhery Bortnick from Swissvale, New Hebrides, asking, since today is SuperSource Day, should we only ask questions about BlackMagic's products, as those are the only ones that have this named feature? The term doesn't exist anywhere else in the industry, so it's harder to talk about SuperSources globally.
Go ahead, Bill.
Your point is, it lands well for me because I faced this a good little bit in the last 5 or 10 years. Things are changing. And, yes, when I was starting out, it was all the Chiron. That's all we had. It's the only word I heard in the first 5 years of my working in TV and the rest of that. And then it became something else, probably DVEs, as Ampex got DVEs. And then it switched again to mix effects buses. And now some people are calling it SuperSources. To me, the most important factor I have, particularly at this point in my career, is maintaining agility. I have to learn to react to what the overall market is doing and not get stuck thinking to myself, I'm going to force everybody to call it what I call it, because if not, they're wrong. And, in one sense, they are, because that's not what the industry calls it. But in another sense, They are searching for and trying to find a new language to describe the subtle differences of the way we do it today versus the way we did it yesterday. And if I don't start embracing that in my career, and again, this is a personal comment, if I don't start understanding how the younger kids call it or the older people in different industries call it, I'm limiting myself, and I don't want to do that. So that's my philosophy about trying to figure out what the right thing to call something is. I try to stay open and not think that the way I used to do it is the only way to do it.
Go, Chris.
I've often said that in this industry, there's no such thing as the good old days of television. The technology advances. We have far superior tools today. I have better tools in my pocket than I ever used to work with, in the beginning of my career 40 years ago. But I'm very glad that I was trained and I learned and I was steeped in the ways of the past. It creates a good foundation. When you have to deal with a production switcher, a Chiron, a character generator, a Quantel DVE, an ATA still store, and you understand how all those different devices wire together and have to be timed properly, so blah, blah, blah. I mean, it makes you appreciate something like an Atem. It's like, gadzooks, this is far superior than what I used to work with in even some of the trucks I used to work in the early part of my career.
Even if it's just to be grateful.
Yes.
So that you're not angry. It's really easy. Like I love the comment of like when someone's complaining about the Wi-Fi or their cell phone, that their cell phone isn't working. They're like, it's going to space. It's going to space. Like we're talking and when it goes to space. And so I think that, just knowing how hard it used to be is useful just so that you don't get too upset with the little details that aren't working. And by the way, the reason we call it a SuperSource is, in my opinion, it's the best word for it. Like it's just, it has nothing to do with whether we can talk about it in other things. But I just think that everybody else's description of it is garblegook, and SuperSource is just
I had never heard the term before COVID. And then we did office hours and you kept talking about it. I go, what is SuperSource? What is... And it
just happened. I think that the main thing is it's one word that describes something that at least I understand. Well, it's kind of one word. Anyway, so but the point is that I just felt like everybody else's descriptions of what this is just didn't land at all. And this is just easy to say, and it does it. So this has been more of a general discussion. We're trying not to have it be about BlackMagic. It's just that the BlackMagic's term is better than everybody else's, in my opinion. That's why we used it, because it makes the most sense. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I think the point that's being made here is it's okay to have a classical education. And yes, there's certain things about the rules of cutting film and relating to editing A/B roll systems, magnetic timelines, and making that transition. It's okay as long as you have that backdrop to work with. And by the way, a mortise is actually a mat.
Next question.
Next question coming in from Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. What is a good source to learn even more about the whole issue? Are there recommendations about online trainings around?
There isn't. That's why we're talking about it here. And this is why we do the thing. There's just not really anybody discussing SuperSources. And so, and it's something that we use in all of our shows, and we all have opinions about them and everything else, but there really isn't any, solid source of what that is. I have somewhere in the future, I will make YouTube videos where we talk about these things, but I don't know when that'll be. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael with the last question. Could somebody similar to the Fenwick Framer or something be used when the talent is not in a seated position to ensure SuperSource integrity, like a pastor at a pulpit?
We just try not to show them. We just show them that, I don't know if we can... I don't know if we have a place for that. You just don't use the SuperSource. You cut to a full frame. You paper over it. Go ahead, Chris.
You could do something as simple as put a spike mark on the floor and say, hey, I want you to look as good as you can possibly look, and you look great when you stand right here. I would stand right here.
Yeah.
Feed into people's ego.
We try.
You could put stirrups on the floor and say, put your toes inside here.
I think you give them tap shoes with steel toes.
Very strong magnets.
And very strong magnets. It's really easy to stand. It's really easy to stand right here. It's really hard to go anywhere else. I think that would be
Plus,
there.
you can do that Michael Jackson leaning thing, which is very cool.
That was those are little hooks. Those are little hooks that he did. That
brilliant.
I was watching a concert video of that, and he, you can see him if they cut around him, you can see him lock him in just for a second there. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you can have a system like you have in your car for when you have automatic lane change. It's a lane protection. So if you lean a little too far, it beeps into your ears, into your IFB that you're leaned I'm sure out of the frame, and you go, "Oh, I'm leaning. I'm changing lanes." Sorry.
It is funny, as this is again another kind of off subject, but talking to talent and getting them to walk in post transforms the stage experience. Like it's really hard to get them to do it because most talent. People can be good at things and they think they're good at everything because they're good at something, but they're not, so they're really good at talking, but they're not managed, and so when we've gotten people to do it, and what that is the way I describe it, I was like, we really want to make sure they have the highest impact for your talk. And so what you want to do is when you're setting something up, just walk across the stage, just go to a new place. You can talk to new people, but make sure to get to a spike, and when you get to the spike, when you want to make that point, stay on that spike for a little while. If you want to make a point and you want it to be epic, stand on that spike. And we'll know that if you're standing on that spike and we're going to rehearse it with you, we're going to get it close up. It's going to be short depth of field. And it's just going to look like this boom, like a movie. And anytime you're walking, it's not. so like it's going to be, we're going to be waist up and you're not going to look as, it's just not going to look as epic. It's going to look fine. It's going to look like everybody else's presentation. We told that to one person at this thing and he nailed it. And it was the best thing about something I don't care about. Like it was about a business tool and it was like, I don't understand why you'd ever use that. But it looked like a movie. Like because he would get in there and we always had this we knew where he was going and that other camera would set up for it. And and we had the two cameras for these different things. Then they were set to, I think they were set to, in these zoom lenses, I think they were set to 4, but they were way back there. And they were Super 35 sensors and they had these short depth of field and it was just barely his head in focus. And it looks so good. And then we showed that to other people and we got other people in the company to do the same thing because he looked so good. I mean, it just looked like he looked like a movie. And
Is this Mark?
No, it wasn't Mark. It was someone, but it wasn't Mark. Mark just walks all over the place. Go ahead, Chris.
Different CEOs behave differently. If you ever got to work with John Chambers, who was the original CEO of Cisco, when John walked into the room, the whole room was fair game for him. He'd get off that stage. He'd walk every aisle. You had to light everything. The video shaders were really going to have to work. I can remember the first one. Alex did a lot of work with Mark Benioff from what's it called?
Salesforce.
Yeah. But I got to work with Mark one time before Alex did, and I put a camera on the front edge of the stage, low, and it was like this absolute rock star moment. And Mark hit that point, and it was an unmanned camera because budget thing. Mm-hmm. And we took to that shot, and there was like this gasp in the control room. Everybody went, and he looked like a rock star standing there. It was just such a great angle. But yeah, I think the best way is to play to people's ego. Say, hey, look, you look really good when you stand right here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It was good. It was a good day. Good first hour, good second hour. Fun discussion. Thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. Thanks to the incredible folks on the back end making all of this happen, cutting the show and designing the show, managing the show, developing for the show. Really, really amazing work for everyone in the back end there. And thanks to the producers for asking all these great questions and keeping the conversation moving. We had a really nice packed day of questions and comments. So really, really well done. A quick reminder that we have the show workshop today at 12 p.m. That's 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's a great place if you're just trying to figure out being a reader, but also how to cut and how to do there's a lot of rehearsal. There's a lot of places for you to test things. We do that on the weekends as well, but the best time to get feedback in real time and talk about it and look at it for readers, panelists, or hosts is really Tuesday at noon Pacific Standard Time, 3 p.m. Eastern. So check that out. It's in the email that goes out. And yeah, traveled 77,000 miles today. That's 124,000 kilometers, and that's 610 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into after hours. And I went a little over today. Something that was going. Chris and I were just kind of like, talk about things.
Chris, were you ever an ADO 100 operator?
Yep, we used the ADO 100.
Digital audio. Oh,
wasn't a fan of that DVE.
It was early though.
Box digital optical. Yeah,
That's
first
how they
DV
did that first Tonight Show multi-box opening I ever saw, where videos of past shows floated over the window. That was
look at those cards.
That was the box. Yeah, the
Nice
box
hair.
that did ADO. Ooh, wow.
The first DVE I used was a Contel, I want to say 2000, 1000.
Paintbox Pro, or let's say that was the ADO setup.
It was a good looking DVE. The ADO
Look at all
100.
those individual chips.
expensive to hire though in a studio.